So in this video, I want to talk about DanMachi, the Sword Princess or Side Story Volume 13. And one thing to note on that is that one of the things that I always kind of thought when getting into the side stories for Sword Princess, I always thought it was going to be more just heavily focused on Eyes, like it was just Eyes was going to be the main center stage. And there could be seen as positives and negatives, being the fact that it would be that and the fact that it is not that, because there is some focus on Eyes, but there's also focus on other characters. In particular this volume, it is focused on Lefia, and she's a character that I really disliked in the first couple of volumes, which is something in the side story anime that a lot of people don't like because she's very grindy, kind of a little bit overprotective. But in this volume and leading up to this volume, you get a very different perspective of her. You get a backstory, especially in this volume. Like, this volume is just pure dedication to Lefia. And of course there's a lot of stuff that's gone on with Lefia leading up to this volume as well, but it's been a while since I've read the side stories for DanMachi because of the fact that it's been a while since Volume 12 came out and then Volume 13 came out, and just seeing the journey is definitely a bit of a blast from the past, because this is much more focused on her current status going forward and also the past as well, and especially in the sort of early stages, because this is basically very much in line with Volume 19 of the DanMachi main story, because there's this whole section where Bell pops up in like a bunny kind of little outfit where he's a disguise, and Lefia's like, huh? Why is that kid screaming and running away? And then she realizes at the end of the volume that it was Bell all along, hiding in the school. Basically, this is the school district, so for those that know what's going on in Volume 19 of the main story, this is the side story to that, which is of course focused on Lefia and the Loki familiars. And you have this giant ship. It kind of reminds me of Harry Potter with the games event where you had all those different schools and you had that like giant ship, but I feel like this would be much more bigger and grander in scale. It does make me kind of wonder like how big it would be, but I mean it kind of makes it sound like it is a fortress that it was used to help defeat the Leviathan. In my notes, because I do write down notes when I read all this stuff, it was used to defeat the Leviathan, and it helped alongside with another familiar member back then too. Now it's kind of being refitted into a school with, of course, one of the gods overseeing it. Everyone kind of, all the kids all growing up as they going through school, they all become like familiar members, and then they learn, do different tasks, and they station themselves near different locations at different pit stops, get repairs. And in this case they've pit stopped here for a while to get repairs and everything done, and they use this as an opportunity to go into the dungeons to gather monster materials to get credits for their academic components. And where Lefia comes into this is the fact that she is basically a sort of instructor. She's there to help one of the particular groups go into the dungeon, teach them about different skills about the dungeon, so that if they want to become adventurers, they can become adventurers. And that's also where this is an opportunity for different familiar members to do a bit of a scouting out. There was a bit of backstory with Lefia as well, where actually one of the certain members of Freya's familiar were trying to scout her out, and it kind of showed that, oh, you know, people were paying attention. That's one of the cool things. It goes into her backstory. It's not like it's super deep and interesting. It goes like more of her origins as the elves and in the woods and the little location that she lives in, and how they're very much intrigued about interacting with other humans out in the world. It's called Wishy Forest, how you want to pronounce it. Wishy Forest. I'm sure someone else will complain about the pronunciation, but basically it's just a bunch of elves that really want to explore more outside the world and interact with people, which is why clearly she has that desire, while there are other elves that are much more secluded and don't really want to deal with others out there, which is, yeah, you know, fair enough. Some people out there can be kind of difficult and you don't want to deal with that kind of rubbish, but of course she gets tasked to help train these kids, and some of them are a little bit difficult. Some of them are not as willing to listen at the start, but they do learn, they do come together as a team, and the ending result is actually really good. One of the things that I liked about it was Loki, like why Loki kind of sent Lefia to do this, was that Loki's mindset was actually felt like Lefia became too stubborn, and especially in the late part of this volume, you can see that Lefia is still reaving from the pain of the death that happened with Filvis. And honestly, I'm very happy with this, because in the past volumes, one of the things that I had a problem with was when there was a death, it kind of felt very much like they killed like a really minor character and they kind of just brushed it off very quickly. But with Filvis, it felt much more impactful, and I think it's because it was much more built up and it was obvious that this was a big heavy hitter that they were going to use. So I'm a little bit more happier with that, because the fact that it feels like it has a long-term repercussion, and this volume kind of delves into that, and I feel like it does conclude in this volume, but at least it has a rippling effect, and particularly on Lefia, because of the relationship that they had. So that's just one thing that I actually liked about this particular volume. And also Lefia kind of having an impact on these party members and how they now want to join Loki Familia when they get the opportunity. And one of them, named Luke, kind of had, I wouldn't say it had a crush, but definitely blushed a lot when Lefia's interacting. But one thing I noticed, and it was when I wrote down my notes, but it kind of contradicted itself, but I still want to note on it, because it's my thoughts as I was reading through it, is that it almost felt like Lefia was becoming a bit like Eyes and Bell in certain parts, but it also was very heavily pushing this idea that Lefia was trying to become Filvis. Like, if I do this and I do that and I behave in this way and I defeat this and I train like this, I'm going to become like Filvis. And they were very determined at becoming like, oh, if I lose this body part, I'll understand Filvis better and become one step closer. But in some parts I kind of felt like she was taking some inspiration from Eyes and Bell, because of the desire to want to explore, the desire to want to go into the dungeon and become an adventurer and experience new things. That kind of felt like it a little bit, but I know some people may disagree with that, but that's perfectly fine. And especially at the end of the volume, where she actually finds out that it is Belle in that outfit, and Belle was also helping with the whole situation with the collapse of the dungeon, because that's what they were doing. They were going in there, teaching, getting these kids the experience, the knowledge, and then when they did their kind of final kind of day thing, things went wrong, or not day, but days, when they go into the dungeon for their next big thing. The floor collapses and they get separated, so there's this big fiasco, and the Loki Familia members go in there to help rescue. It's a cool volume, because the whole premise is basically Loki sends Lefia to become an instructor, to kind of get out of her stubbornness, get out of her own rut. She's teaching these kids, she's learning about herself, she's going through the day-to-day life routine of being an instructor, some of the fun little shenanigans that go on, like little fan clubs, students having crushes on teachers, little crushes in general between students, and also having those romance issues like the fear of Luke getting stolen by Lefia and one of the students getting upset. It's fun, it's simple, it's nice, it's like one of those little school arcs. It kind of reminds me, actually, now thinking about it, of Mushoku Tensei, where Rudy goes through certain parts of his journey out as an adventurer, and then he goes through his university arc. It kind of feels like that. It's like a change of pace in that sense. Like, it's all been about the dungeon, but then there's also mixing in not just the dungeon, but also the school academics life as well, and that kind of Harry Potter like big boat thing as well. So I really like that. I think it's really cool. There's a lot of little things that happen in here, little trivial fun facts, but to be honest, that is the core aspect of the volume itself. It is a massive like growth spurt for Lefia, especially after volume 12, because volume 12 was a pretty big ending for everything, and volume 13 still feels like a really big step up, but it's just fun. It's kind of chill, even though yes, there's some dungeon drama going on, but it's still a pretty chill thing. There is some also interesting stuff to do with like how Luke is very touchy about the whole idea of the adventurers being too relaxed in the dungeon, and their desire to like push harder and harder and harder, because Luke's very sacrificial. And the reason being is because apparently monster attacks have increased, and particularly dragons have been doing a lot of damage, and it makes me wonder if this is a hint at a possibility of an arc of leaving the city. Like, what if this becomes a bigger problem, and it's not just Loki's familiar, but also Hestia's familiar has to leave the city of Oratoria, or whatever you pronounce it, and go further out where these monster attacks are getting much more severe? Because it seems interesting, because where are these monsters coming from? Are they breeding naturally, or are they coming from like underground somewhere? Are they just like holes deep infested into the ground? I just kind of wonder that, because it's like the dungeon, the deeper you go, the more dangerous things get, but it's like there's clearly other entrances into the dungeon as well. That's obvious because of the water entrance, so it makes me wonder that, is there something else going on with the dungeon, or is there like other types of like dungeons like that. I don't think there's other dungeons like that. I think it's maybe there's like a deep, like rooted connection to the dungeon and how far it goes down, and monsters are coming out of different areas, and maybe something's happened. It's just a pot theory, or maybe monsters are just getting much more agitated out there that are already out there, or there's like the breeding, they can actually breed with each other. Like, I just wonder what would lead to these monster attacks getting more severe, and I feel like it's mentioned deliberately to lead an Easter egg, or at least breadcrumbs into what is to come, where they may go outside the city, because I feel like a change of pace like that would be really good. Like, you can change the pace in the city in only so many ways. Like the whole school district thing is a cool change of pace, but it's like, at the end of the day, it still involves the dungeon. But it would be curious if they actually left the city properly, and I feel like that's something maybe they're hinting at. So very, very curious about that. So I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think of volume 13 of the side stories for DanMachi? And of course, I will be continuing to go through the volumes as time goes on, and all the volumes in general, not just the side stories, but the main story. You know it. I try to do my best to keep up to date. So again, if you like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.